I've had a lot of questions about how I started writing horror, and perhaps the best answer is a story from my youth. I experienced a few unexplainable phenomena when I was young. I always loved creepy stories, devouring any horror show I was allowed to watch, but by the time I was a teenager, I hadn't witnessed anything truly frightening. I grew increasingly disappointed, feeling almost betrayed. Everything changed when my family moved. We used to live on the East Coast, near the Appalachian Mountains, the blurry blue peaks on the horizon, the rolling hills, and dense forests all around me. I grew up with that landscape, accustomed to wandering through the woods. It was a land half wild, half civilized, easily seen in the towns at the foot of the mountains. The Midwest, however, was a stark contrast. The suburbs here were meticulously built, with perfectly manicured lawns and picturesque streets. Yet, right at the edge of the residential areas, the forest grew unchecked, as if humanity had formed a circle of homes to protect itself from nature. We called this abrupt boundary between the neighborhoods and the wild forest the border. At 14, we thought we were old enough not to be scared of anything, but that sudden division still held us in a mix of fascination and dread. Deep within the woods, about a mile or two from the neighborhood, stood an old house. Its age was unknown, and everyone in the area knew it as a haunted place. Beyond its inherent creepiness, the most unique thing about it was a strange sound, only audible when you stepped inside. We decided we had to enter that house to unravel the mystery of that sound once and for all. It was my 7th grade year. My family had just moved, and I hated my new school. My only friends were outcasts like me. Our group consisted of Hans, the German kid who spoke English with a thick accent, Chris, who was always sarcastic and annoying, and Caitlin, the eccentric girl in the group rumor had it she picked her nose and once ate it. Finally, there was me, smart enough to realize I wasn't cool at all, filled with anger about life. Looking back, I think I was a typical teenager. We slipped across the border in the afternoon. No one was foolish enough to try it at night. Compared to the woods near my old home, this forest was completely different. Back east, giant ancient trees cast long shadows, and a thick carpet of leaves made walking easy. Here, the average trees were dense and chaotic. No one could pass without getting tangled in bushes or vines. Even worse, the Midwest, especially central Ohio, was riddled with unexpected ravines, carved by ancient geological processes. Our parents used to tell us scary stories about kids falling into them and dying. According to them, at least 1 or 2 children met that fate every year. We pushed through the dense vegetation, filled with anxiety. The journey was so arduous that by the time we reached the house, everyone wanted to turn back immediately. But no, this could be our chance to become popular. The house leaned at an odd angle, surrounded by young trees and thick brambles. In front stood 4 old honeysuckle bushes, 2 flanked the main steps. The porch looked like an open maw, and the front door was slightly ajar. We looked at each other for a few minutes, no one wanting to go first, until a sudden downpour forced us to act. We ran onto the porch to escape the rain. "Oh, this rain makes it much less scary," Chris said, looking up at the rain-streaked wall where water streamed from the roof. The sound of rain through the leaves reminded me of home, but the growing darkness around the house only made it feel gloomier. I peered through a dusty window but saw nothing. Hans glanced through another pane, looking anxious. "Boy, you have to go first." Hans just grimaced and pushed the front door. Oddly, it opened without a sound. Inside, everything seemed split by 2 planes. Above and below were murky darkness, and in between, a hazy layer of dust hung in the air. The rain outside created a whispering sound, making the place seem to breathe. "Boring," I muttered. No one objected. We took slow, deliberate steps, testing the ground as if afraid something would jump out at any moment. After all 4 of us were inside, Hans let the door silently close behind us. We stood still, listening to the rain, which blanketed the space with a steady drone. Then we heard a creak from upstairs, followed by a crack near a dusty sofa in the room to our left. We were so tense we almost ran out. And then it happened. "It's like you're in a movie theater," Caitlin whispered, "and the theater next door starts shaking." That was the most accurate description. The house began to tremble gently, and a stronger tremor sent dust falling from the rafters. I shook my head to clear the dust from my hair and stepped forward, following the direction of the sound. It led me to a dark door. The basement, of course. We gathered around the basement stairs. In the faint light filtering through small windows, thick darkness obscured the bottom steps. "Hands, you go first," Chris grimaced. I carefully descended, testing each stairboard. They seemed sturdy, but I told myself the others could see my silhouette against the dim light below. They would help if I fell. But when I reached the bottom, I froze. The growling was louder here, like distant thunder. I felt subtle vibrations in my feet each time the deep thrum peaked. All of that I noticed, but it was what I saw that truly froze me. Streaks of light pierced through a collection of sharp objects. 3 pitchforks leaned in one corner, old harvesting tools with curved spikes on the opposite side, a bear trap hung on the wall, rusty hose, dangling cleavers. Every ancient farming implement imaginable lay, scattered haphazardly at unpredictable angles. A hand touched my shoulder. "How is it?" Chris asked, his body hunched to avoid the cobwebs we just navigated. He looked around. "Oh my God." Chris jumped when Caitlin bumped into him, and hands appeared right behind her. "Looks dangerous," Caitlin said. I agreed, but I hate this place. I hate this town. I hate everything here. I'm not going to let a haunted house scare me, especially when the danger here is completely mundane like all the other times. I want to be scared. I want to run from a ghost, but I'm always disappointed. "We just need to be careful," I said, stepping forward. The sound was closer. "No one has said anything about this basement yet, which means we're going further than anyone has dared. Or should we just go? This discovery is enough to make us famous," Han said, looking worried. I turned back to him, my gaze sharp, shook my head, and continued forward. Caitlin bypassed Chris, grabbing my shoulder as I moved. "It sounds like the ocean," she said. "Yeah, it does," I replied, wondering if that meant anything. I carefully maneuvered around a series of sharp tools that had fallen from a rotting shelf. But the scary vibe the other kids talked about, it was nowhere to be found, just a basement full of rusty junk. Hans and Chris cautiously explored the other side of the room, then cut across the middle. We eventually reached the end of the basement, where the sound grew distinctly louder. "Wait," Hans said, holding up a hand to signal a stop. He picked up a metal rod from a nearby pillar and poked it at the dirt floor. It suddenly crumbled, revealing an opening about a meter wide in the decaying earth and rock. The opening had been there before, just narrower and hidden in the darkness. Now, the faint light of the rain filtered down from below, where small streams of rainwater swirled through what looked like a ditch more than 30 meters deep. "This leads out to the ravine," I realized, muttering. "We're hearing the river." "Do you think the dead kid fell from here into the river?" Chris asked, chuckling. I looked down into the hole from the safest distance possible. Jagged rocks and sheer drops made this exit look incredibly dangerous. "Yeah, maybe they died falling and were washed away by the rain." Chris fell silent at the idea. Caitlin squeezed my shoulder tighter. "Let's go, guys. We're done here. Let's get out." I straightened up, about to say something, when a sudden wave of fear washed over me. My heart began to pound, my body urging me to act as if I were in immediate danger. Caitlin clutched my shoulder, hurting me. "What was that?" Hans asked, his voice trembling. I had never been scared before. Nothing had ever startled me, no image, no sound. But I knew exactly what it was. The scary vibe the other kids swore was real. I tried not to run, afraid I'd crash into the labyrinth of rusty farm tools. Instead, I held the group back, staring into the misty opening. "Do you guys see anything?" I asked, my breath quickening. The fear was rising, almost to a point of panic. "No," Chris replied, trembling. My body screamed that something was about to grab me, that it was getting closer, but I still saw nothing. In my fear, I suddenly felt a strange thrill. This was what I wanted. I wanted to be scared. A contradictory feeling surged, and I closed my eyes, letting the fear consume everything. I even smiled slightly for a moment. Then I opened my eyes, confused. I closed my eyes, it appeared. I opened my eyes, it vanished. I closed my eyes again, now certain I was seeing the source of this inexplicable fear. I couldn't explain it, but I could only see it with my eyes closed. In the absolute darkness behind my eyelids, a horrifying image slowly emerged. It was a dark shadow, made of flickering monochromatic streaks of gray against black. Its shape constantly shifted, as if dancing in the void, clad in ragged clothes. Its body was covered in large wounds, its neck bones exposed beneath a head tilted sharply to one side. I opened my eyes and it disappeared. My guess was it had been in the middle of the basement, moving towards us. "Oh my God, close your eyes," I whispered. "No," all three shouted in unison. "Close your eyes now," I screamed. They complied, and I could see them losing control. The invisible fear had been almost overwhelming, but once they saw the thing approaching. "We have to go," I said, my mind feeling blank. Finally, what I had always sought had happened. I had seen the supernatural, felt it, and the fear had obliterated every other emotion, leaving only a pounding heart and cold, clear-headed awareness. "It's going to push us into the hole." Those words snapped the group back to a semblance of alertness. "That way," I gestured to Chris and Hans, towards the other side of the rusty maze. Tears streamed down Hans's face. He nodded. The two of them quickly moved. I led Caitlin to the other side. "Go fast." I almost ran straight into the curved spikes. I stopped, not daring to breathe, then closed my eyes to check the entity's position. It was close, blocking our way forward. I turned back, desperately searching for a path through the maze. "Caitlin, where is it? You don't want to close your eyes. Look, please look." As we fumbled forward, trying to avoid dangling blades, Caitlin clung to my back, her head constantly swiveling. "It's near Chris and Hans." I heard Hans's painful scream, but I couldn't turn back. My eyes were fixed on the bear trap hanging on the wall as we slowly glided past it. What if it snapped shut, due to the humidity, our movement, or anything else? I kept my composure until Caitlin's head passed the danger zone, a danger she hadn't even realized. "I just saved you from something." "It's back this way," she shrieked into my ear. I closed my eyes to check and saw it reaching out to me. I crouched, crawling forward, pulling Caitlin behind me. We were covered in dirt and dust when I reached the stairs, grabbing Chris's shirt just in time to prevent him from falling straight onto an upright pitchfork. We all scrambled up the stairs, but I paused for a beat to close my eyes and look back. The thing stood in the middle of the basement, its distorted smile mocking me, as if saying, "You think you got away." And then I ran too. Hans had a cut on his hand, but otherwise we escaped without serious injury. Our discovery led the neighborhood association to organize a fundraiser. The house was demolished, and the hole filled in the following year. We also gained a bit of fame among the kids in the neighborhood for the event, which led to more expeditions and even scarier locations, but those are other stories. However, I never told my friends what I saw in that last glance. That was also the origin of my passion for writing horror. I realized that this world wasn't just about vague fears or random occurrences in the dark. If, in that moment, I hadn't strangely tried to seek out fear and close my eyes, perhaps I wouldn't be here today. I think it's important to honor the millennia-old tradition of sharing scary stories, because in those stories, there's always a bit of truth, hidden strategies that might one day help someone escape a terrible fate. Because, as that mocking grin showed me, that horrifying thing has sentience, and it is incredibly intelligent. In that instant, I understood the subtlety of its strategy. It intentionally makes people scared. Those who are scared often look around. They always keep their eyes wide open, and they don't close their eyes. Remember that the next time you feel an inexplicable fear of the dark, your instinct to look around, to fix your gaze into the darkness, might be exactly what something is waiting for. Before rewriting this whole story, I had never thought the incident at the house was related to my life. But it was also around that time that I started having trouble sleeping. From 7th grade until my 3rd year of college, I stayed up late every night, and if I did sleep, it was poorly. The reasons were many. Games, new loves fueled by soda, a growing hatred for school that felt more and more like a prison, and an intense fondness for the silent expanse of the night. I often walked around the neighborhood at night, sometimes venturing boldly into the nearby woods. This area was very safe, and the newly built residential area had nice paths, steps, and wooden bridges leading straight down to the river, so sneaking out for a walk was mostly out of boredom, not to seek fear. But one early autumn night in 9th grade, I saw something in the woods. I wasn't stupid. I immediately ran home, determined to return and investigate the next day. For the first time in a long time, I slept very well, excited for a Saturday of exploration. It had been nearly 2 years since the house incident, and life had become frighteningly dull. I called to reassemble the old group, but Hans had returned to Germany. Chris arrived first. He looked hesitant. Since the encounter at the house, Chris seemed shyer. He often said he wished it had never happened. Chris's usual sarcasm had diminished greatly in the past 2 years. "I'm not going into anything," he muttered without greeting. "No houses, no caves, nothing." I nodded, "Okay." Caitlin arrived a few minutes later with a bright smile. I had only seen her briefly once that past summer, and she looked more mature than I remembered. This was definitely not the quirky middle school girl anymore. "What did you see?" she asked excitedly. "He said it was blue," Chris answered, crossing his arms. "Yeah," I said, looking at the trail leading into the woods, a faint blue light in the distance. Very hard to see, but definitely somewhere down in the ravine. It hurt my eyes. She immediately headed towards the trail. "Well, let's go." We followed the easy path on the left side of the ravine. The gully was deep and steep, but lined with wooden fences. This place was more like a park than a wild forest. This wasn't the main river either, but a fairly large stream ran at the bottom, swollen by recent rainwater. The path we were on ended abruptly. The trail on the other side of the ravine continued, accessible by the bridge at the entrance, but it led far away towards the main river. "That's it," Chris said, shrugging. "Can't go any further, Sam." Caitlin said, sliding past the wooden fence. Chris rushed to the barrier. "What are you doing?" I was also a little worried. "Look," she explained, carefully climbing down. "This section isn't too steep. There are roots and dirt, not just rocks. It looks like people have been down here before. Maybe the older kids come here to smoke." I chuckled and also slid past the fence. The steep dirt slope became navigable thanks to some horizontal roots that made perfect footholds. The descent was intense, but I didn't feel any danger. At worst, if I fell, I'd just slide down the slope painfully. "Come on," I yelled to Chris. He reluctantly followed, complaining nonstop during the descent. At the bottom, I looked around to assess the situation. The ravine was about 15 meters high on each side, blocking out all sounds except those of nature. The narrow slope we slid down ended right below a small waterfall. The waterfall looked pretty, but the strong current made it impossible to proceed in that direction. If the stream hadn't been blocking, we probably could have climbed over the rock face, but now it was a large, cold, and wet wall of water. "It's okay," I said. I saw the strange blue light in the opposite direction, further down the ravine. I led the group, picking our way along the banks to find dry patches to walk on. After a few minutes, the drumming of rain echoed from above and reverberated through the moss-covered walls. "Not again, please," Chris yelled. Caitlin and I exchanged glances, coming to the same conclusion. All three of us quickly ran back to the dirt slope we had just climbed down, trying to climb up one by one, but the drizzle had quickly turned the ground into sloppy mud, and each attempt to climb only made the slope crumble further. Chris looked at me reproachfully. "We're stuck." I shook my head. "Just keep going down. This ravine has to lead to the river eventually, right?" "Yeah," he replied, his voice beginning to tremble, almost shouting, "Through that thing." "What thing?" Caitlin asked, annoyed at being covered in mud but showing no fear. "That thing she saw, that glowing blue thing out there," Chris grumbled. "We should have just sat here and waited for someone to rescue us." "What if it gets dark?" I asked, trying to shout towards the walls. My own echo replied faintly, "They'll never hear us." With no other choice, we clung to each other, scrambling over old mossy rocks. The high wall beside us within reach made me feel a little more secure, while the rain grew heavier, adding to the already wet autumn chill of the ravine and the mist from the stream. My hands slowly went numb despite my attempts to warm them, and soon the whole group began to shiver violently. "This is the worst thing that's ever happened," Chris muttered. I didn't answer, too focused on the ravine ahead. Thick layers of leaves covered any patches of ground not submerged by the swollen stream. Tall, ancient trees grew straight from the bottom of the ravine, none climbable, but all blocking out what little faint light filtered through the dark, cold clouds. "It could be haunted, though." "Yeah," Chris said. "Right, this is the worst experience, but I'm actually enjoying it." "Hello?" Chris yelled upwards. I followed his hopeful gaze. We saw the back of a house perched precariously on the slope, right at the edge of the ravine. A flimsy wooden fence seemed barely able to prevent someone from stepping out the back door and falling straight down the cliff. We yelled continuously for a few minutes but got no response. Chris mustered all his strength for one last shout, then froze. A faint call, like a response, echoed from afar along the ravine. Chris lunged forward 4 steps, then froze again. Right, we know this type of thing. I hesitated too, but Caitlin stepped forward. We don't have a choice, she said firmly, shivering from the cold rain. We moved carefully, trying to scout every possible hiding spot, but the dense vegetation, large trees, and rushing stream made it impossible to be completely sure. Caitlin clung to my shoulder, sometimes walking with her eyes closed as a precaution, but she saw nothing. The rain suddenly grew heavier, and visibility in the misty haze became extremely difficult. Hello, a distant call echoed, so faint it was hard to hear over the heavy rain. There was something off about that voice. We hit a sudden wall of darkness. Looking at it, the group realized that the dense trees and narrowing ravine had combined to plunge the area ahead into complete shadow. Chris's face showed regret and fear, mirroring my own feelings, but there was no choice but to step through. Cling to each other and don't let go no matter what, I said, stepping forward to lead. Thunder rumbled overhead as we entered the face of night. I heard the stream gurgle to my left, felt the cold, mossy rock face to my right, the rain roaring above, sometimes collecting in thick streams that poured down on us. Hello, the call was clearer now, followed by a short echo, as if the person who had just yelled was standing near the opposite wall, in the dark with us. Is it other people? Chris whispered. I will. I squeezed his arm painfully to silence him, and Caitlin clutched my shoulder even harder. I turned to look at her. At an undetermined distance in the thick darkness, a small blue orb seemed to appear. It was a strange shade of blue, like what I had seen the night before, and never anywhere else the kind of color I wouldn't encounter again until years later with advanced LED Christmas lights, with hues that seemed extraterrestrial. Hello there, the voice rang out again, and the small blue orb swirled. Another orb appeared, an inverse purple, as if it were a reflective form of light. Looking at it caused a sharp pain. They were eyes too, otherworldly blue and purple eyes, floating along the ravine wall. Their faint light dimly illuminated whatever they looked at. The whole group ducked down, hiding behind a large rock as the eerie light swept past our position. Hey, come here and look at this, the voice continued to call. The contradiction in the sound was strange. It sounded like a young man, perhaps a girl, hard to tell, but it definitely sounded human. The thing began to move, continuing its search. Based on the faint light from its eyes, I estimated it was about 1.8 to 2 meters tall. We slowly circled the rock as it passed, then dashed straight into the darkness, running and stumbling. The idea was clear. This dark area must soon widen, and eventually we would reach the river. We just needed to get there. We froze simultaneously. Hello there, hey, come here and look at this. Got any money, hello? Dozens of voices rang out from the darkness in front of us. We saw a series of randomly appearing blue and inverse purple eyes in various places, all searching, snarling. Their combined light was just enough to reveal faint outlines, hazy, shadowy figures emanating from below the impossible eyes, each human-shaped, about 1 to 1.5 meters tall. The ravine flashed with a display of muted colors, approaching us with every second. Hello, that was the first voice from behind us. They're coming back this way. The group huddled in the dark, hands and feet numb with cold, utterly terrified. This was the perfect moment to panic. We only had 2 choices: run backward, trying to get past the largest creature, or dash forward, through the darkness where dozens of smaller creatures waited. I grabbed Caitlin's hand and sprinted backward, but Chris pulled away from me and ran forward. There was no time to think. I plunged straight through the slippery stream, stumbled, and struggled to get up, incurring countless scrapes and bruises, but the hello echoed from behind us, seeming to get closer despite us running at full speed. When we reached the muddy slope and the waterfall base, it was pouring rain. We tried to climb, but the rushing water made it impossible, and our hands were numb. The thunder seemed to mock our screams for help. Caitlin, quick-witted, used her hands to push away the mud with the water, revealing sharp rocks and roots underneath. Despite the scrapes, we clung to them to climb, constantly looking back to see if the eerie eyes and haunting calls were catching up. But it seemed we had escaped. That climb was far more dangerous than the descent, and I thought I might break a bone at any moment, but we finally made it. We both ran along the edge of the cliff, keeping a safe distance, afraid that the rain would sweep us down or loose rocks might collapse at any moment. We could have run in the opposite direction to go home, but Chris was still down there. We passed the unnaturally dark area. From this angle, it looked completely unnatural. The faint light piercing through the rain seemed to stop midair somewhere below. Caitlin occasionally shouted Chris's name as she ran. We left the unnaturally dark area behind, continuing along the ravine as it gradually widened. In the far distance, we could see the river. "Over here, guys," we heard Chris yell from halfway up the ravine wall. Caitlin immediately ran towards his voice but was suddenly yanked back as I grabbed her hood with all my strength. She stumbled, almost falling into a sudden deep crevice with jagged rocks waiting below. Caitlin flailed her arms, trying to regain her balance, then slowly twisted her feet on the slippery mud to push herself back. I helped her steady herself, still dizzy. She backed away from the edge. She almost met the exact same fate as last time. "Over here, guys," Chris's voice rang out again. "Over here, guys." Her jaw trembled. Caitlin leaned over, looking down. I also bent my head to look. At first, we saw nothing, but a few seconds later, something seemed to realize its trick had failed. The strange blue and purple lights appeared, looking up at us for a moment, then a huge, blurry shape slowly moved away. Caitlin gasped. "That thing is dragging up a horrible, bloody pile of flesh." I squeezed her hand tightly. "It's a deer," I whispered through the heavy rain. I dimly saw Chris's blue jacket in the distance. He was splashing in the water at the mouth of the ravine, waving frantically at someone. "He got out. Go to him. Go," I told Caitlin. "Make sure he's okay." Confused, she argued for a moment, but then followed my instructions. I turned back alone, heading down the edge of the ravine, searching for the unnaturally dark area. Lying face down in the mud, I crawled closer and peered over the edge. Just like the encounter with the spectral entity in the house, I had to look back. I needed to know. In the faint, ghostly light emanating from the alien eyes, I saw dozens of smaller figures tearing at the deer carcass, fighting and happily devouring it. My gaze swept over them, then I realized I was also being watched. The largest figure sat alone, its blue and purple eyes fixed on me, never leaving my sight. It tore a leg from the deer's carcass and threw it towards the other creatures. A minute later, the darkness began to swirl like a shifting, blending, and dissolving fog. The entire unnaturally dark area vanished in a blink, revealing trees, dry leaves, and flowing water, a natural scene no different from other parts of the ravine, except for the scattered deer bones. Clean white bones, stripped of flesh, lay haphazardly, some shattered for their marrow, lying on the mud. Rainwater streamed down my face as I tried to comprehend everything that had just happened, and suddenly, a strange thought struck me. I seemed to have witnessed a family's rest stop. Halloween arrived right after the ravine incident, and the holiday season was truly amazing for me. I felt inspired. The flickering entity in the house might have been a rare, once-in-a-lifetime experience, but the strange creatures passing through the ravine near our neighborhood proved that the supernatural was real. It was my dream as a horror fan, and now a creator of my own stories, come true. As a result, my status as a high school freshman seemed to be elevated. Although I didn't truly fit into any group, I became a kind of popular free spirit, known for my constant soda consumption and telling scary stories. This reputation and implicit separation suited me perfectly. High school, to me, was just a place with white walls I had to go to for 8 hours a day. It wasn't just a metaphor for prison, it was literally a prison. Most of the time, I was bored to death and delighted in scaring people with my horror stories. The Halloween season made people especially vulnerable to fear. I didn't know where everything would go once the holiday passed and scary stories became passe, but I was enjoying it. Until suddenly, Caitlin started dating a football player. Chris and I weren't talking anymore. We had had a falling out after the ravine incident. From then on, only Caitlin and I hung out until Josh appeared. I didn't even know Caitlin talked to anyone in the sports crowd, let alone found them interesting enough to date. My stories became darker and angrier. I also joined the football team mid-season, even though I had no idea how to play. I wasn't terrible by freshman standards, but my presence definitely annoyed Josh. I made my unpleasantness clear publicly. Our rivalry peaked in November, near the end of the season. The final confrontation began after a football practice. Most people had gone home, but I lingered in the school's main hallway, resting before walking home. Chris stumbled through the main door, pushed hard by someone from behind. Josh entered right after, accompanied by two of his friends and Caitlin. I frowned at her, and she looked at me with an apologetic, worried gaze. "Chris said you were the one," Josh accused, trying to use his height to intimidate me. I glared at him, not intending to back down from the intimidation. "What?" "I heard about your little stories," he replied, his tone mocking. "Caitlin always spoke well of you, but Chris said they were real. You made people believe those stories were real." Chris pulled away from Josh, looking at me with a grimace. "Sorry, but what I said was that sometimes you tell stories that are too real, making them easy to confuse." Though I didn't show it, I felt a little disappointed. But if that was what Chris needed to feel better after what we'd been through, I didn't think I could blame him. Josh cut me off. "I'm just tired of everyone listening to you like you're somebody. You're just a freshman, you're nobody." He stepped closer. "So go ahead, try it. Scare us. Find a real ghost or make us believe a story. I don't think you can do it." His goal was to humiliate me in front of Caitlin, that was clear. But I was fed up with his petulant games, and I was also full of anger and resentment about too many other things. I stared at him. "Okay." "Don't," Chris began to plead, but Josh pushed him aside. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. The art of storytelling I had developed had sharpened my observational skills. Horror seemed enhanced by details, by surroundings and environment. I was always acutely aware of subtle sounds or specific spaces. I gathered those things, examining them through a taut string in my chest, the feeling of fear, which I had learned to modulate to mimic the audience's reaction. I opened my eyes, slightly confused. Many times, I sensed voids in the world around me, a few places emitting something that could only be called emptiness, emotionless. That feeling confused me, interrupting my sharp anger. Shaking my head, I walked slowly down the hallway. The sense of fear within me began to rise again, stronger as I continued. I followed it like a dowser searching for water. "Where is he going?" one of Josh's friends asked. "Shut up, just follow him." At least for now, it seemed Josh was genuinely intrigued. They followed me as I felt myself being led to the school library. Unsure what was happening, I took a book from a quiet shelf. The library was empty and dimly lit by the faint light of a November afternoon through the window. They each took a book too, I noticed. I sat at a table in the middle of the room. They sat on either side of me, forming a long line. Josh deliberately sat next to me, his face full of mockery. I raised my book, covering my face, blocking their view forward. They did the same, confused. One of them snickered. Chris looked miserable, while Caitlin, on the other side of Josh, seemed excited. What was I doing? Where was this going? Each action amplified the fear within me. Why did this empty library scare me? I felt the space in the room with my mind, drawn by an active imagination, drawn by the act of imagining. It approached slowly. It used a corner, its view blocked by the very book. It depended on the reader being immersed, captivated. They suddenly fell silent, abruptly realizing that none of us could see forward. Until now, it had been content to keep itself low, by silently draining the psychological strength and will of its victims. It made them tired and achy after a few hours, even though they just sat there reading. You've probably felt it too. The body's natural defense mechanism is to occasionally look around with an unexplainable sense that something is wrong. Josh frowned. His two friends glanced at each other. A sense of vulnerability began to spread through the group. I could tell they wanted to put their books down and look around. Those brief moments of lucidity temporarily made it flee, preventing serious mental harm. But now, 6 potential victims at the same table ignored that instinct, kept their books covering their faces, refusing to confront the fear, and it began to wonder if these 6 knew. It began to feel threatened. It began to wonder if it should use precious energy to attack someone, but who? It flickered closer, approaching behind one of the books. Caitlin was tense. Chris looked utterly uncomfortable. I felt the group's emotions rising to a crescendo as the overwhelming feeling that something was approaching from behind our books became unbearable. I even thought I heard the faint sound of something preparing to strike. Josh slammed his book down on the table, breaking the atmosphere noisily. Though there was a hint of confusion in him, he feigned anger. "This is all nonsense. There's nothing here. This is just the school library. Come on." We lowered our books. I looked around, my eyes slightly narrowed. The sense of fear that had surged earlier had dissipated, leaving only a vague, underlying tension. "See," Josh continued, "if you can't do it, then fine." I stood up, filled with anger. I slammed one hand down on the table. "But you asked for this?" I channeled the tension in my heart with intense fury and dark intent, then walked out of the library, leading them to the hallway. That feeling quickly led us to the large, open, windowless gymnasium. The gym was plunged in darkness, the cold space like an infinite black void, illuminated only by a thin sliver of light from the distant hallway door. "So this school has 2 haunted spots?" Josh asked, unimpressed. I shook my head. The horrible thing hovering in the library wasn't like a ghost. I thought there were quite a few of them, but they only wanted to stay hidden and undetected, subtly draining the minds of unsuspecting readers. I thought the worst that could happen to them was when someone unexpectedly looked up and accidentally saw them unless you scared it, and it attacked. I felt the silence and pervasive darkness of the gym, comparing it to the first encounter in the house basement. This wasn't like a ghost either, it was something else. I didn't mention the anger I felt reflected back. Chris shook his head, clearly unhappy, but Josh pushed him to follow us. The group began to move deeper into the thick darkness. Our footsteps echoed strangely on the slick floor, occasionally making faint squeaking sounds. Tense laughter rang out among the group as it became increasingly difficult to see each other. We slowed as the darkness became almost absolute. I could only see them out of the corner of my eye, and we began to stumble forward, wondering when the opposite wall of the gym would suddenly appear before us. "We shouldn't be here," Chris whined. "We'll never get there." We touched the opposite wall. "Oh, Caitlin back here, it seems really far to you guys, doesn't it?" Indeed, the 2 tiny slivers of light from the hallway door looked strangely small and distant. The others were just blurry shadows at the corner of my eye. "It's just a dark gym," Josh said dismissively. "There's nothing here." A sudden circle of darkness obscured one of the distant slivers of light. The silhouette of a head appeared in a flash, then vanished. As we stared at the door, a door burst open, then slammed shut, making the light arc in a wide sweep across the floor a brief light that somehow didn't reach us. "Who was that?" one of them whispered. "There's no one else here." "The janitor," another replied. "Why would someone walk around here in the dark?" Caitlin asked. "Not the janitor, but something horrible," Chris mumbled. "Shut up," Josh cut him off. Slow, heavy footsteps echoed somewhere in front of us to the right. The flat, heavy sound came 4 or 5 times, then stopped. We stood still, straining our ears. Lighter footsteps echoed from the left, a quick succession, then also stopped abruptly. Silence filled the space again. "This is unbearable," Chris whispered, panicking. "Good idea," one of them murmured before Josh elbowed him. We quietly moved slowly along the wall, unable to see anything, only remembering that there was a door at the end that led straight outside. The agonizing tension only increased as the gym remained silent. There was no explanation for the 2 sets of footsteps or the shadow that had entered the darkness earlier. If anyone else was in this space with us, they were sitting still, listening, waiting. A whisper came right next to my ear, about 7 or 8 centimeters away. "Hello?" The voice was dry, older. I froze mid-step as a rush of hot, humid, foul breath wafted past my ear. No one in the group made a sound. My heart pounded like a hammer, each beat seemingly prolonging the moment, like a blade cutting through in a brief moment of horror. I feared it was the largest shadow from the ravine. It had been staring at me as I watched it, and now it had finally found me. Light footsteps resonated fiercely to the left, and someone forcefully pushed the dark door on that side and ran out. "Damn it," the voice next to me grumbled, and heavy footsteps suddenly sounded right next to me, chasing the first set of footsteps. We stood frozen, motionless, as the side door of the gym burst open a second time. "What the hell?" Josh asked. We began to realize that perhaps someone was truly in danger. The whole group followed the footsteps, running towards a girl's scream that echoed through the hallways in response to our noise. Josh and his friends ran ahead, turned a corner, and tackled and punched someone. Lydia, a junior whom I recognized from the student council, was cowering against the wall in a panic, just screaming uncontrollably. The scuffle quickly ended, and the man ran down the hallway. The homeless man, wearing a coarse sweater and a baseball cap, turned back to look at us for a moment, mumbling something unclear. He pushed open the main door, the door we had left ajar, to wait inside after football practice instead of standing out in the cold. We stood stunned, confused, trembling, but no one was hurt. The next day, we endured a barrage of lectures and interrogations about the incident. No one was actually hurt, but Lydia, who had stayed late at school to work on a project, had been scared senseless. None of us mentioned how we, accidentally, discovered her pursuer. Deeply unsettled by what had happened, Josh and his friends left me alone after that. The only positive outcome of the event was that Chris started talking to me again. He found me during study hall when I was reading a book. Each time, he whispered so no one else could hear. "You look for these things, and they appear." I myself was still a bit shaken after the homeless man's attack, just shrugging. "Yeah, but that wasn't supernatural, was it?" "No," Chris replied. "You know Brian had to go home this morning, right? He had an uncontrollable panic attack." I frowned. Brian was known for having a morbid and rather annoying imagination. Poor Brian. He said he saw something attacked him while he was reading in the library. I put my book down and pushed it away, looking at him with horror. Chris leaned closer, his eyes serious. "But you didn't tell anyone else that story. We can't be sure that I truly had some strange ability to seek out and detect supernatural things, but the next step was clear. Forget everything. Whether our encounters were due to bad luck or not, they were certainly getting closer to our daily lives and becoming more dangerous." If the homeless man's attack that day had gone differently, Lydia could have been injured or worse, and the school library had now become the center of persistent rumors and unease. Brian told everyone what he saw, and the students' vigilance only seemed to make things worse. Panic attacks began to occur randomly. Every week or so, a student was affected. Perhaps it was their own fear escalating, exacerbated by each new story of panic attacks feeding on itself. Or perhaps it was due to the stirring of the entity, which was originally harmless, that wandered there. It was impossible to say for sure. Either way, my concern about the impact of pursuing my fears on those around me finally outweighed the internal resentment towards school and the life I felt forced to endure. Still having trouble sleeping and staying up too late, I let the prolonged fatigue dull my senses, which had been keen to fear, and extinguished my interest in the horror genre. I put it all aside and continued to live through the crazy circus that high school created in its own way. It turned out I loved football. I joined the team just to confront Josh, but then he and Caitlin broke up, and we became harmonious teammates. The longer no strange things happened, and the longer I refused to think about horror or tell stories, the more everything faded. Public stories about the house near the border and the homeless man's attack gradually became funny memories. They lost their initial authenticity, and I was considered a normal teenager, for better or worse. No notable events happened for nearly 2 years. I was completely absorbed in the endless struggle to find satisfaction and a place in high school, though I didn't follow the same conformist mindset as others. My reputation, as usual, was based on opposition and separation from everything around me. Caitlin chose her own path. Her dating a football player wasn't a one-time event. This often put us at odds in subtle but annoying ways. Chris gradually moved past what had happened by pretending it never existed. He followed a similar path to Caitlin, pursuing leadership roles in the band, math team, chess club, and student council. This led to an underlying but strong tension between the three of us. As the junior year homecoming approached, I had my driver's license, and Chris had been dating Caitlin for a week. That bothered me for reasons I couldn't articulate. I had a girlfriend for a month at that point, so it shouldn't have mattered, but outwardly we were still the best of friends. According to the plan for homecoming, I picked them up. My girlfriend's house was the next stop. Wearing rented formal wear, Chris and I drove, joking around, both trying to mimic Sean Connery's voice and recite James Bond lines. Though beautiful in her dress, Caitlin was silent, looking out the window. That evening was a bit chilly with the mid-October cold and Halloween approaching, but I ignored it all, focusing on driving safely and looking forward to a fun evening. "Do we really have to pick up Nicole?" Caitlin suddenly asked, referring to my girlfriend. "Or should we just go to dinner, just the three of us?" I chuckled, a little irritated. Beneath the cheerful exterior, I had almost expected this from the moment she got in the car. "Yes, we have to pick her up." "She's a little dumb, you know," Caitlin continued. I've been meaning to tell you for a long time. You're so smart and she's not. I don't think you two are a good match. Not again, Chris interrupted, his voice clearly annoyed. You always do this with every girl he's interested in. She held up her hands, feigning helplessness. It's not my fault if he keeps choosing stupid ones. I glared at her through the rearview mirror. Stop it, come on. She turned back to look out the window. I pulled the car over and walked to Nicole's door while they continued to argue in the car. Nicole looked amazing in her dress, even prettier than Caitlin, and she knew it. As a cheerleader, Nicole was proud of her looks, and Caitlin was right. Despite my lack of motivation due to hating school, I was quite intelligent, and there were often moments of complete misunderstanding between Nicole and me. But she was a good person, I always told myself that. Nicole was a good person. Back in the car, it took only about 3 minutes before she started arguing with Caitlin. Both relentlessly flung subtle, sarcastic barbs, simmering arguments, and bitter words that continued through dinner at the restaurant, gradually drawing Chris and me into the fray despite our best efforts to appease everyone. Dinner was a messy disaster of discontent. As we left the restaurant for homecoming, night had fallen, bringing a strange darkness. Clouds obscured the moon. While driving, filled with anger, irritation, and negativity, I began to feel familiar sensations against the things that used to terrify me about the Midwest landscape. It hadn't changed, even though I was now in a car. Although many new places had appeared in the past few years, the basic layout seemed unchanged. A vast expanse of dense pockets of space, connected. These could be shopping malls, suburbs, or highway intersections, but between those spaces were always abandoned patches of land. There were always fields and random forests. One side of the road might be a sprawling suburb, while the other was centuries-old wilderness. My discontent and anger rose to a tense point as the car filled with shouts, and Caitlin and Nicole began to shove each other across the passenger seat. I felt something about to happen, just ahead, at a specific point on the right side of the road where the trees hung low. We were in the middle of the empty spaces, driving through the dark woods, and a very specific spot ahead seemed darker than the others, causing me to have the strongest reaction yet. Sudden danger? I slammed on the brakes and swerved the car off the road, skidding a bit and stopping in the rough dirt. Stop right now, I screamed with all my might, dragging out that single word for almost 10 seconds. I only stopped screaming when I ran out of breath. Nicole, Chris, and Caitlin were all silent, stunned by my sudden outburst. I stared straight ahead, unmoving. Small dots appeared on the windshield, and I could see streaks of rain glistening in the headlights. The moment of stunned silence passed. I felt Caitlin looking around. "What are you doing?" she asked, looking out the window. I heard her breathing quicken. "What have you done?" Chris leaned his forehead against the car window, suddenly anxious. "You don't think?" My gaze slid along the headlights, through the rain, to the tall, ancient trees ahead. The darkness there made something inside me vibrate like a physical force. I felt unsettled, but the problem wasn't the trees in front of me. I turned to look through the back window, confused. The eerie red light from my brake lights illuminated the dense trees behind the car. "What is it?" Nicole asked. "He just stopped the car because you're sitting still," Caitlin interrupted, slowly opening her door. "Oh, why is that?" Nicole began to ask. "Caitlin, sit still in this damn car, don't go outside," I whispered, but she didn't hear me. I also opened my door and stepped out, leaving my formal jacket in the car. "Where are we?" Caitlin asked, looking at me over the car roof. I shook my head. "I don't know." The ancient trees surrounded us, but a thick carpet of leaves covered the ground, completely lacking the dense undergrowth that should have been there. This forest resembled the ones I remembered from my home back east, full of large, old trees that prevented undergrowth from developing. Even worse, the road had completely vanished. Caitlin raised her hand, feeling the light raindrops filter through the canopy above. Further away, we could hear larger drops falling from the leaves, the sound echoing from all around, drowning out the noise of my car engine. "So what is this?" she demanded. "A parallel nightmare reality, or did we go back in time? What did you just do?" "I don't know," I replied, my anger gradually turning into uncontrollable laughter as I thought about it. Against my will, I burst out laughing. "But this is just too good." Caitlin suddenly beamed. "It really is, isn't it?" Chris got out of the car, looking at us with annoyance. What's so funny? Nicole opened her car door, completing the circle of conversation around the car roof. What's going on? Where's the road? I looked into the darkness, trying to identify some shapes, blurred shadows against the deep black. It looks like there's a hill over there. We should climb it to see where the road is. Yeah, Caitlin added, excited. Let's go deeper into the forest. So we're just going to split up now, Chris whined. Nicole glared at him. No way. I pulled out the keys, turned off the engine, but left the headlights on. Trying to suppress the excited laughter brought on by fear, I led the way between the trees, following the long beam of light from the car's headlights. Without the engine noise, the forest came alive, echoing with the sound of rustling leaves, dripping water, and an occasional crack or snap from somewhere in the darkness. Each eerie sound made Nicole cling tighter to my arm. I felt powerful, at least while there was light from the headlights, but the light only reached so far, and we were forced to let our eyes adjust to the darkness before moving into the absolute black. A crunch sounded to my left. I suddenly remembered the dark gym and the terrifying moment of waiting for something horrible to approach my face. I wanted to abandon the trip to the hill and run back to the car, but we were still stuck in this strange forest. Chris, keep an eye on my left, I ordered, slowly advancing into the darkness. Caitlin, keep an eye on my right. Nicole, scream if you see anything strange. She gripped my hand tighter. I was going to. Chris backed away and leaned into me. Oh my God. The whole group turned to the left. At first, I didn't see anything strange until I noticed a branch lying at an odd angle. It was glowing red, even in the darkness, and looked quite rotten. I tilted my head, curious. It moved, disappearing behind a tree trunk. I quickly clapped my hand over Nicole's mouth to stop her from screaming. That was a leg, Chris hissed through clenched teeth. No, I replied, making the difficult decision. Keep going. Run. They followed, and we ran together. The flat ground, covered in wet leaves, made running easy but also very slippery. Several times someone fell, and we rushed to help them up and kept running. The crunching sounds seemed to follow us, slowly retreating behind us, now accompanied by a strange hissing sound like breathing. The ground began to slope upwards, and we raced to the top of the hill. Look, black, Caitlin pointed. She was right. In the distance, we could see an unidentified building, a brightly lit gas station, and a road. The hill led downwards, and we ran at full speed until I noticed the gaps on the horizon to the left and right. The cold wind made the whole group realize what was happening immediately. No, 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 Chris yelled. A river, no. In front of us was a wide, black, calm, and gloomy expanse of water between us and the distant gas station. From various places in the forest behind us, a series of crunching sounds and heavy breathing rang out. I can't swim, Nicole said, looking defeated. You can't, Caitlin asked, a hint of panic in her voice. Nicole sighed. Jumping in will ruin my dress. Caitlin's expression suddenly turned cold. Let me handle this. She bent down, scooped up a handful of mud, and threw it straight at the squealing girl. There, now get in the river. My heart pounded as I ran after Nicole's frightened screams into the water. Caitlin and Chris plunged in right after me. The icy water stung, bringing with it an irresistible horror. I had always hated swimming anywhere but a pool, always imagining horrible things waiting in the deep, ready to grab my feet. But now, we had no choice. Struggling to stay afloat in the freezing black water, I swam behind Chris and Caitlin, who had surpassed me when I hesitated initially. A low sound, like a chuckle, echoed from behind. Irresistibly, I turned to look. Distorted, decaying figures slid into the water from the bank, chasing us from the woods. I couldn't be sure, but they looked like torn-up corpses, moving impossibly, clumsily, mostly animals, but one vaguely human shape. The human figure's cracked skull sank below the black water, staring at me with a horrible, shattered grin. I had a distinct feeling it knew my irrational fear of water, and it was terribly eager to make that fear a reality. Swim faster, I yelled, lunging after the others, truly terrified for the first time in my life. I fought with my numb arms to swim as fast as I could, cursing my formal suit which hindered me. There was no way to know if those horrible, decaying things were catching up to us in the water. Ahead, Nicole screamed, exhausted and only halfway across. We reached her as she thrashed and struggled. My leg, she shrieked. I dove down while Chris and Caitlin tried to keep her from being pulled under. The shock of the cold water hitting my face almost made me inhale water, but I fought through the panic and dove deeper. I could feel the empty void surrounding me, the darkness and cold increasing below, leading to unknown depths. Fingers, it's fingers! A bony, twitching hand was gripping her ankle. Adrenaline surged. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed 2 fingers in each hand and pulled hard. The decaying hand tore in half. I felt the rotten flesh tear apart strand by strand. Nicole kicked hard to break free, and I thrashed my way to the surface. "They're in the water," I yelled, but the group was already screaming in fear and swimming away. The things underwater continuously grabbed and clawed at our legs and arms, but we were almost there. In front of us, corpse-like figures emerged from the water, waiting and watching expectantly. We were forced to stop, treading water. A deep despair enveloped us all. "We can't get to shore, we can't escape," Chris panted, looking at me. "I'm sorry I was a bad friend." Completely numb, I shook my head. "It's okay, my friend." "What are those things?" Nicole asked, her voice trembling. "Why are they chasing us?" "It doesn't matter anymore," Caitlin said, shivering. "They've got us." I looked at the human-shaped corpse standing on the bank, staring at us. It just stood there on the shore, smiling. One horror, still one more thing. I looked at my 3 friends, struggling to stay afloat, shivering. "Are you scared?" "Yes," Nicole screamed, both frightened and angry, but Chris and Caitlin just nodded. I took a breath, letting the cold engulf me. Then let's just drift downstream for a while and see what happens. I had never felt anything like those moments. Danger was imminent, death right before my eyes, but it no longer overwhelmed me, nor did it panic me. The situation seemed hopeless. Decaying corpses shuffled along the riverbank, following us closely. They knew the cold would get us very soon. I wondered about their origin, about their motives, but their story wasn't what mattered. I let all my senses open. The cold night wind, the gentle drumming rain, the deadly icy water we were drifting in, silently and desperately, and the strange voids in my perception that still remained even after many years. The empty spaces in my simulated fear, the emotional dead zones, were all on one side of the river near the gas station. Ignoring them, I focused on the primal fear of the deep, unknown water ahead. I felt it, right ahead, as we drifted downstream, waiting. "Swim to the other side," I croaked, my breath so short I couldn't shout louder. They nodded, too exhausted and cold to argue, then started swimming towards the forest bank. The human-shaped corpse let out a gruesome laugh, and the decaying things slid back into the water, trying to beat us to the other bank and wait there. This cat-and-mouse game would continue until we had no strength left. A wave of pressure slammed into my body through the water, terrifying me. "Back, back!" The others followed, and we swam towards the gas station. A series of crashes and splashes sounded behind us, but none of us had the energy to look back. We climbed onto the bank, gasping for breath, trying to regain our strength. Nicole, without hesitation, dashed straight towards the gas station. As always, I turned to look, and this time, Caitlin also stopped and looked. An imperceptible depression on the black swirling water, with a strange, powerful force. "What is that?" Caitlin asked, clutching my wrist. I shook my head. A whirlpool under the river. Some kind of creature hiding there, preying on animals. I don't know. Either way, it scares the hell out of me. I've always been afraid of deep water. Just a few more meters, and we might have been down there. "But how did you know? How did you know it was there?" I had no explanation, just that. The danger was over. The terrifying escape in the dark made my heart pound and my body tense, but we had survived. I stood there with Caitlin for a few minutes, trying to compose myself. Chris ran back, his face horrified. "It's worse than you imagine," he squeezed my wrist. "Oh my God, what is it? Where are we? Is this a nightmare world? I thought so." He swallowed, his eyes wide. "Worse, we're in West Virginia, you bastard." I pushed him, laughing. Chris immediately stopped acting and burst out laughing. "I tricked you, finally tricked you." Caitlin just shook her head, a wide smile on her face, though she was still trembling. Calming down, Chris turned to the building next to the gas station. It was a car repair garage. "The people there will help us get the car back on the road. We're near a place called Blacksburg and Clay Lake." The drive back took over 5 hours. Nicole was angry the entire way. "We missed homecoming," she complained, as if that mattered more than what had happened that night. Chris sat with a large map the mechanic had given him. This river branches several times, but it runs straight up near where we are in Ohio. Do you think there's anything important? Strange, I replied, my eyes fixed on the road. I don't think so, unless you're afraid of meeting river monsters sometime. It could crawl upstream and wait. Is this the river that the ravine drains into? The nearby school and the house at the border, too. I'm not sure, he replied. Oh, but I used to live in Virginia before moving to Ohio. This type of forest. I recognized it immediately, I said. Chris looked at me through the rear-view mirror. You mean you know this area? Never been here. He shook his head. I mean, the landscape details. We turn off the road in Ohio and end up somewhere else in the world, but a place you find familiar. What are the chances of that happening? Caitlin wiped dried mud from her dress, leaned forward, grinning broadly. Can we find out now? I've been waiting years for this. Clearly, you can't keep ignoring it anymore. We almost died out there, I countered, glancing at Nicole, who was sleeping in the passenger seat, looking disgruntled, ragged, and dirty. She had no idea what she had gotten involved in, but she had been in just as much danger as us. Maybe, Caitlin replied, still eager. But the mystery is still there, whether you want it or not. It's time to find out the truth. I shrugged, turned on the heater, and rolled down the window to feel the passing landscape. I pondered what had happened, how it all began, how it unfolded, whether any of this was real, or if we were just sharing intense delusions. Chris took a quick gasp. Oh, something stirred in my lap, falling out of my shredded formal wear. I thrashed, trying to keep the steering wheel steady while reaching to grab it, my eyes wide with horror. I picked up a rotting, reddish, mildewed finger, then flung it forcefully out the open window. I drove, Caitlin in the passenger seat and Chris sprawled in the back. We had spread out the map and come up with dozens of theories. Was it all related to the river, or was it related to me? And if so, was I just finding these things, or was I somehow causing them to happen? Our first mission was to eliminate the river as a variable, so we drove towards the hills where people often hiked, far from our town. If anything strange happened, we would know the river wasn't the cause. When my family first moved to this area, I often went to those hills. They weren't flat, covered in trees, and full of cliffs and strange geographical phenomena, but the clearly marked trails made this popular area safe for hiking. It was a Saturday, so we saw many families with small children preparing for picnics. The parking lot was full of cars, and I wondered if this place could hide anything horrible. As soon as we entered the woods and the sunlight disappeared behind the dense canopy, I felt it. Go that way, Chris sighed. I was hoping you wouldn't say that. How does it feel? Caitlin asked. I stopped, listening to the rustling wind overhead, the rhythmic movement of the leaves, the uneven patches of sunlight providing some warmth in the chilly mid-October air. The logic and feel of this area were different. I don't think it's dangerous, I said, thinking aloud. I think it's strange, but not dangerous. Great, Chris chuckled, looking around the dense bushes. At least for once. We followed the winding trails, quickly branching off towards the strange feeling that was guiding me from an undetermined distance. We passed the top of a cliff, about 12 meters high, where an old waterfall reservoir once stood. Two children waved at us from below while their parents photographed the surrounding beauty. Hello, Caitlin called loudly, waving back. I also waved, a little anxiously. I didn't want to discover anything horrible when there were children around. But closer, I was sure that the potential phenomenon in these hills wasn't truly dangerous. The feeling of the situation didn't carry the same sharp undertone as previous times. It had something different, something I couldn't quite define. There were no emotional dead zones in my perception here either. I was confident everything would be fine. In front of us was a crack in the rock face, curving at an odd angle. This isn't dangerous? Chris asked. It was a fissure in the rock mountain itself, winding after a short section of rough, jumbled terrain. The terrain above prevented access in any other way. There was no way to climb and look inside. This fissure emanated an uncomfortable feeling, but it carried none of the anger, fear, or malice of the things we had faced. It simply existed. I thought for a moment that I could feel something very bad somewhere in the surrounding forest. I scanned the shadows and light, but saw nothing. I shrugged. Well, let's go in, Caitlin said, leading the way. Inside the fissure, the sunlight was suddenly dazzling. There were no trees overhead, no canopy along the rock edges, just bare gray cliffs devoid of moss or lichen, and a clear blue sky without a single cloud. We left the mid-October chill behind and began to sweat from the stifling heat as we walked along the fissure. The strange feeling that had led me here was now distinctly stronger. My head felt a little hazy, and we reached a turn where the fissure split into two completely different paths. To the left were jagged rocks and a challenging narrow wall. To the right was an easier, dry stream bed. Go right, I decided, just wanting to get out of there. The rock walls on either side were too steep to climb, so we had to keep walking to get out. A few minutes later, we emerged at the fissure's exit. Wait, Chris said, is this not where we came in? He was right. Somehow, we had returned to the original entrance. Maybe it just looks similar, Caitlin said. No, look, I said, pointing to our old footprints on the soft dirt. This is exactly where we came in, but how? Did we just not realize we turned around? Chris asked. Caitlin stared intently at the strange fissure. No, I think that's what he was feeling. There's something wrong with this path, and we ended up where we started. I shrugged. Strange, at least now we know this isn't related to the river. We unpacked our backpacks, preparing to stay overnight. The park usually closed at dusk, so we weren't allowed to be there, but I had a feeling something bad was coming, and I wanted to see what it was. The others agreed. If something evil was lurking in the park, night would be the easiest time to spot it. I woke with a start, my back aching from leaning against a rough tree trunk. The night air was cold and strangely silent. Something was very wrong. A feeling of violence and hunger approaching made me uneasy. Wake up, Chris stretched, waking first. When did we fall asleep? Voices, Caitlin wondered, looking through the canopy. Everyone should have left by now. Pushing through trees and bushes, we approached the fissure entrance. The voices were coming from deep inside. We watched in confusion and astonishment as three figures emerged from the fissure under the moonlight, dressed identically to us. The more we looked, the more we realized they weren't just identical, but also had the exact same voices. I kept thinking we'd never get out, the other Chris said, sounding relieved. Chris next to me in the bushes clutched my hand, his face horrified. What the hell? Are they us? Caitlin whispered. I remembered the strange feeling standing at the fork in the fissure, an inexplicable thought popping into my head. This is us if we had chosen to turn left instead of right. I think so, I whispered back. They were lost in the fissure all day and just got out. But how? Chris asked. And now what? They'll want to take over our lives or something. The violent, hungry feeling rising in me suddenly spiked. It's here. What? Caitlin asked as we watched thin, almost invisible threads fall from the trees. They floated in the air, surrounding us. There they are. Suddenly, the threads yanked back, pulling the three doppelgangers towards the tangled trees. They began to scream in terror before being pulled up into the silent canopy. What do we do? Chris hissed through clenched teeth, his neck tense, his whole body trembling. Something just took them. Is that how it works? I realized, my eyes wide. It waits for people to go in there, waits for the natural phenomenon to create their copies, and the copies emerge at night when everyone is gone. Then what? And then what? Chris yelled, shaking me violently. And then what? I think we have to follow, Caitlin said, swallowing hard. They're us. We can't just let this happen. It's moving, I exclaimed, watching the rustling canopy. Follow it. I don't think it knows we're here. We shouldn't be here. We dashed, hiding behind any available cover to keep up with the moving canopy. The silent night air offered us no concealment, so we had to move slowly to avoid detection. I kept a safe distance, afraid that if I revealed myself, the thing would turn back and choose a double dinner. It stopped abruptly. We waited, but it didn't seem to sense us. Under the moonlight, we saw a gaunt, perhaps 2-meter wide, shape slither down a tree and into a small cave. A few minutes later, it slithered out and climbed back into the trees above. The canopy rustled again, as if it continued its hunt. Let's go, I led the way, sliding into the dark, damp cave. A horrible stench of decay wafted up. It smelled like dead bodies on the road, but 1,000 times worse. It's safe, I told Chris, and he turned on his flashlight. That was a shocking mistake. The light swept across a long tunnel leading underground, a tunnel lined with corpses in various stages of decomposition. There were hundreds, even thousands. How could this happen without anyone knowing? Chris mumbled, trying not to vomit. Caitlin covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. It only takes the copies at night when everyone is gone. No one is ever reported missing, so no one suspects anything. Something stirred in the darkness. Chris shined his flashlight onto 4 long, white entities moving near where we had slid down. They looked like mummies, completely wrapped from head to toe in thin threads. We ran to them and began trying to pull away the tightly wound threads. The material wouldn't break. We picked up rocks and started cutting. The first person we rescued wasn't one of us, but a stranger. He looked at us with panicked eyes until we freed his mouth. Oh my God, he screamed. You guys have to get me out of here. It's going to come back soon. Be quiet, I reminded him, and he trembled but stopped screaming. We continued cutting the threads around him. When I saw his freed neck, I froze in horror. What do we do? Caitlin asked, tears in her eyes. The stranger looked at each of us, his lips trembling. What's wrong? Wait a minute, I told him. Just a moment. He nodded anxiously, his fear growing clearer. I turned to Chris and Caitlin. They ran to the other 3 bodies. I guess those are our copies. Listen, sir, I said, lightly touching his wrapped torso. You have to make a difficult decision here. His teeth chattered together. Perhaps he had guessed. Your skin, I continued. It's gone, and you've lost a leg too. I think it ate you. He swallowed, then nodded through tears, sweat beading on his forehead, glistening in Chris's flashlight beam. It stung me. I felt it chew, but it didn't hurt. I think maybe I'll be okay. I held his gaze. If we leave you here, will you be afraid? His lips trembled as he tried to stop himself from panicking. Perhaps. Do you want me to? I couldn't finish the sentence. He shivered. Just cut where the leg is gone, he said, trying to suppress the sound. It's fine. It's not your fault. And also, he said, give me a name and an address, my daughter's name and my family's address. I remember, I said. Are you sure? He asked, sobbing. I have a good memory. I began to cut the threads around the man's missing leg, releasing the pressure of the wrapping. I almost immediately understood his request. Blood poured out in a stream, evaporating in the cold air, flowing down the slope of the cave towards the layers of bodies below. He shivered, then went still. He just died, Caitlin asked, her voice on the verge of panic. Is he dead? Chris stopped. Quick, I told them, then moved to the next wrapped body. There was a scratching sound near the cave entrance, and we froze, but nothing entered. We freed the heads of the copies, and they looked at us with no less surprise. Are you hurt? Caitlin asked, trying to tear the threads with her bare hands. No, the other Chris replied. Please save us. My copy remained silent, its cold eyes fixed on me. Are you us? The other Chris asked. Wait, that's not important. There's something, it caught us. We see it, our Chris replied, continuing to cut the threads around his copy's shoulder. Please hurry, the other Caitlin shrieked, looking at me. Why aren't you doing anything? I know why, my copy replied, his voice cold. What will happen if they save us? I suspected the Fissure had created our copies somehow. I felt it when it happened. I slowly nodded. Who will live our lives? He also nodded slowly. Which group is the original? I added. You have no way of knowing. Perhaps we are all identical. Caitlin and Chris stopped, staring at the 2 of us. No, the other Chris pleaded. Please save us. We'll deal with that later. You can't do this. The other Caitlin begged, looking at me then turning to Chris. We'll change our names. We'll go far away. Anything. What do we do? Our Caitlin asked, turning her expectant gaze to me for an answer. Chris looked at me, his face terrified, awaiting my decision. We found a large rock outside to hide behind. We had to be sure the creature returned. Not long after, it slithered down the tree and into the cave with a deer wrapped in threads. Did the Fissure duplicate the animal too? We listened to the screams that began soon after. The screams were quickly stifled, one by one. Perhaps the creature was wrapping them up again. We plunged into the forest, choking and sobbing all the way back, our panic-stricken return. All our belongings at the makeshift campsite were left behind. None of us dared to go back for them. I'm sorry, Caitlin sobbed, leaning against the car. I'm the one who wanted to play with this like it was a game, and now? I didn't answer, too horrified to speak. Somewhere on that hill, a copy of me was struggling in the tightly wound threads, being eaten piece by piece, and he had known from the moment he saw me what choice I would make. It's not just your fault, Chris told me, tears streaming down his face, his nose sniffing. We agreed. What would our parents say if an identical group of us appeared? How would we live? How would we explain this? I could only nod. We were too young to deal with this madness. I had thought that one day I would go back there, lure the creature out, and run it over with my car, ramming it, scattering its insides onto the road, then burning its body. But I never went back. I went to the address the stranger had begged me to visit. I sat silently in the car, a feeling of misery engulfing me. This was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, and I had brought it upon myself by playing with things beyond my understanding. I saw a school bus stop nearby, and a little girl jumped off the bus and ran towards the house, greeted by the man I had seen bleed to death in the cave full of corpses. He was here, calm as if nothing had ever happened. Perhaps he had explored that fissure and left with his family, completely unaware of the fate of his copy that night. I suddenly felt a deep, unsettling fear that such fates could be very common. How many strange, natural places lead to the unwitting creation of doppelgangers? How many intelligent creatures lurk outside those anomalies, preying on the unsuspecting? There could be hundreds of other copies of me out there, even now, suffering and dying in the most horrifying ways, and I would never know.